Hello. Tonight I'm going to wrap up the Dale Carnegie How to Win Friends and Influence People book club with an Ask Me Anything. So readers have sent in a bunch of questions and I'm going to go over them and tell you what I think. All right, so let me get started here. Let's see, I've got a question from Darrell G. I've never read How to Win Friends and Influence People because I'm concerned that it will make me too self-conscious of social dynamics while I'm interacting with people and thus ultimately be harmful to me. Change my mind. Well, first of all, you could be right, but I would say that human amnesia, just the failure to apply what you intellectually know when you are faced with a practical situation, is a much bigger problem than being so focused on following a set of artificial rules that you can't actually operate in a social context. So I think that's just very unlikely, although I guess it could be true for a few people. Right? And especially I would start with just doing the basics. So remember the three, well, maybe you don't remember if you haven't read it, but the three basic principles that Carnegie talks about in part one. So first of all, just avoid criticism of other people. Also try to give sincere appreciation to others. And then finally, let other people do a lot of the talking. Don't just blab about whatever's on your mind. Let other people talk. These things are so basic and yet so hard to actually follow through on. Seems to me that almost everyone is likely to gain from really thinking about it, but maybe not in absolutely every case. All right. Okay. Then, let's see. We've got another question here from Tim. Part one. How did you make the changes described in the book in practice? Did you just consciously try to keep it in your mind when you talk to someone, or did you go about it in some other way? And what I say is actually, I had figured out most of the stuff in Dale Carnegie over the last 20 years. I read it in high school, but I just wasn't ready to listen at the time. And then I really forgot about the book. And I did improve in a lot of ways from my original very abysmally low level. And by the time I read it, it was more like recognition rather than something that I actually started following because of the book. But still, I really think that if I had listened, it would have been highly beneficial to me, and I just wouldn't have had to reinvent this wheel to such an extent. Right, but I think the main thing that I got out of actually rereading the book is just paying more attention. So yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do, but it's just so hard to actually go ahead and do it. I mean, just to refrain from criticism, the level of self-awareness that you need to stop doing that. And just, like I said in the last post, just before you say something that is less than perfectly pleasant to another person, just ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish here? And usually you just don't have any good answer. You are criticizing others impulsively, being unpleasant impulsively, and what's in it for you? Less than nothing. All right, then Tim continues. Let's see. Do you think the examples are outdated? It always seemed to me that he just happened to stumble across people who were especially starved for recognition, and that the people in my life didn't respond quite as positively to me talking about their interests. I don't think this is outdated. It's just that Dale Carnegie is cherry picking, of course. This is a self-help book. It's not social science. So he is picking a bunch of stories where he constantly seems to be absolutely correct, and his ideas always work really well, and that's silly. Of course, they're not going to work that well in real life. The main thing you need to keep in mind is that you can improve a lot, still not be that great. It could very well be that the most effective person in the world still isn't that good, and yet that marginal difference, the improvement that you get, is still a great value, and that's where I will swear by Dale Carnegie, not as a story about how or a formula for success. Rather, it is a way to tilt the odds in your favor because based upon impulsive behavior, they're tilted really heavily against you. All right. Let's see. Tim also asks, perhaps it's just because I'm not as good a conversationalist, or maybe not even as genuinely interested as he was. But often when I try to inquire someone about something I know they spend a lot of time on, they aren't that eager to talk about it. And of course, there's a lot of people that are very hard to draw into conversation. You could be asking them about what is officially the great love of their life, and yet they don't really want to talk. right? They're just too wrapped up in whatever it is they're doing. And when that kind of thing happens, I'd say it's pretty simple. Just move on, right? So this is something where you can just try this as a consistent low dose, and in the long run it will lead you to meet a lot of people and have a lot of great conversations, but don't expect to succeed 80% of the time or even 50% of the time, right? So, I mean, implicit in Carnegie, I think, is the idea that you really just want to get your numbers up. Just try more, right? And then, of course, when you're trying, you do better, but a lot of it is also just getting people out of their shells and just making more of an effort to see what you can get going with other people. All right. Then I've got some questions from Jason Ford. Let's see. Talks about, I thought it would be interesting to discuss some criticisms of Carnegie. Sinclair Lewis said Carnegie's advice was, quote, to smile and bob and pretend to be interested in other people's hobbies, precisely so that you may screw things out of them. End quote. I personally do not agree with Lewis's criticism, but it raises some interesting questions. One, does Carnegie encourage inauthentic behavior? So Carnegie officially says absolutely not, always wants you to be totally authentic, but I think that he actually is kind of encouraging people just to control themselves more. And of course, when you control your own actions and words more, in a sense, you're not being totally authentic. You're not blurting out exactly what's on your mind. I think that what Carnegie would say, if you really could cross-examine him, is that he's trying to get people to try to improve. During the process of improvement, you're not being that authentic. But when you're done, you're authentic because you've actually successfully changed yourself. Right? So I think that does put a better spin on it, and it's not wrong. So again, like when you have someone who's lazy, and you say, try harder to not be so lazy. Right? During the period when they are trying to improve, they're not being authentic because their impulse is to be lazy. But the idea is through practice, they improve, and then their character changes. So I think that's what Carnegie has in mind. And then there's the follow-up question from Jason. If the answer to question 1 is yes, does it matter? And I'd say it really does matter if you have to live inauthentically, or if that's what you're doing. It does hurt, right? It hurts to have to pretend to be someone else. I mean, for me, many of the shows that I am most drawn to are ones where there's a character who has to live a double life, and you see them juggling their different responsibilities and the different ways of treating other people. But you also see just how much weight is on a person who does not get to just be authentic with the people that are around them. So it is a serious issue, and there is the question, how much can you really authentically change, right? And I think the right answer is, ultimately, you can't change your personality tremendously, but marginal changes have so much value for your success and happiness in life that it's totally worth trying to make those marginal changes. Again, just things as basic as just stop and think before you criticize other people and ask yourself, what are you trying to accomplish? And you don't have any answer, don't do it. Okay. Let's see. Right. And let's see here. What else have we got? All right. Let's see. And there's a follow-up from Jason Ford saying, my view is that authenticity is overrated in our current time. The search for who one really is leads to narcissism and bad relations. Maybe it's better to be phony to get along with people. What do you think? Right? So I'd say it's complex again. So, if you are always just trying to please other people, that is a recipe for being unhappy with your life. And that's not at all what Carnegie's trying to do, and it's not what I would advise. But what I think a better way of thinking about it is, it is a good idea to be pleasant to other people. Try to be pleasant. But think of it as a means to the success that you are trying to achieve in your own life. And again, just a lot of it is that there are so many opportunities in life, all of which are low probability events in terms of working out well, but tipping your odds in your favor a bunch of times when you multiply it out over many years of life adds up to a big improvement and doesn't require that you live in an authentic life. Okay. Then we've got Art Carden. All right. Art Carden asks, best Carnegie practices for dealing with misbehaving or just not listening kids. Appealing to the lovely adulthood if they embrace virtue now sometimes creates unnecessary tension. All right, so my recommendation for kids, I do have 4 kids, and I recognize that kids vary very widely in personality, and I can see among my 4 kids what works with one does not work so well with others. When I meet other people's kids, I realize, wow, other people's kids are even more different than my 4 kids. So my 4 kids are very similar to each other when you go and get a family of other kids, so always keep that in mind. But still, with kids especially, I am a strong advocate of the calm, direct approach. I think that this is not only better for the adult that is interacting with the kids, it makes you feel better about the interaction, but also I've talked to a lot of kids. As I've sometimes says, I really actually like kids more than adults. To me, kids are just more entertaining and more fun to be around. That's probably part of why I have 4 kids. But anyway, this calm, direct approach where you don't lose your cool, where if you are in charge, you exercise your authority, but you do it without getting angry, right? Even if you are punishing a kid for misbehavior, don't be angry. Just be decisive. Say, all right, this is the way it's going to be. This is what you've done. With my kids, I always would ask them when they're getting punished. So first of all, like, are you ready to apologize for what you've done? And second, or actually, back up. First thing is, all right, why are you being punished in the first place? First thing. So make sure the kid gets it. Make it very clear. If they don't get it exactly, tell them. Don't make them guess. And then after that, saying, are you ready to go and apologize for this? Here's what you're going to have to do now. And in like a very small number of words. The way that I've seen parents sometimes give a long, rambling lecture to a 5-year-old, I'm just like, how can you talk that way to a 5-year-old? Just say, you hit another child. You're not allowed to hit other children. Don't do that anymore. If you do that again, you will be punished in the following ways. Are you ready to accept that? If not, the punishment will continue. You'll remain in the naughty corner. If you are ready, you'll be released from the naughty corner, but I'm watching you. Right? That is what I consider an effective approach. Repetition, but not rambling explanations using a lot of vocabulary. I've seen parents using complex vocabulary with small children. Right? When they're trying to punish them. Like, this is not a time to improve their vocabulary. This is a time to lay down the law. All right. Let's see. And in terms of specific Carnegie advice, the advice just to avoid criticism and to show sincere appreciation, my experience works very well for kids as well. So, while I will strictly punish very bad behavior, I also am very tolerant of a wide range of other behavior. So if a kid asks a lot of silly questions, normally say, just let him ask his questions. That's what he's going to do. Or a kid doesn't want to wear a jacket. If he's not going to get frostbite, say, well, all right, well, it's your body. All right, so try going without a jacket. Let's see what happens. Right? Of course, if the kid then goes and complains, that's the time to say, okay, well, next time you don't get a choice about wearing the jacket because you made my life bad by making your bad decision. On the other hand, if the kid's willing to live with a bad decision, then I say, let the kid do that. Right? If they're not hitting other people or so on, that's where I would draw the line. But in any case, avoiding criticism, only finding things that are especially egregious, focus on those. And again, also all of Carnegie's advice for the best way to criticize. So beginning with praise, ending with praise, make the problem seem easy to correct, talk about how you or yourself are not perfect. These are all ways to make the criticism more acceptable to the child that's listening and get them to pay attention. Although also, of course, make it clear what they're doing wrong and what's going to happen to them if they persist in their ways. All right. Let's see. Then I've got a question from Denver. Denver writes, whenever I see a video of you, that's me, Bryan, in a debate, you manage to put a smile on your face, laugh, and keep things jovial, even if you vehemently disagree with your opponent. So just to start, I would say I'm glad that I seem to pull that off. If you were actually reading my mind, you'd realize I'm not doing nearly as well as you think. I am actually often very agitated. Normally, for me, if I do a debate in the evening, I have about a 50% chance of sleeping that night. 50% chance that I do not sleep the entire night after a debate. Right? So, of course, a lot of it depends upon who I'm debating. If I'm debating someone as lovable as Robin Hanson, then I sleep like I would normally would afterwards. But if it's something that is more combative or more conflictual, then yeah, actually, even though on the outside I seem to be having a great time, inside it's pretty aggravating. And I do the crazy thing after debate of in my head replaying the event and saying, okay, this is what I should have said, and furthermore, right? So even though I would never even be given that much time in the debate to say all the things that I think that I should have said, but that's the way that I do respond. And actually, very often I find that the only way to really feel okay after debate is to write it up. And that's where I can go and say all the things that I wish that I had said, but I didn't. I can say everything just the way that I wish that I had said it in the heat of the moment, but did not do so. But anyway, glad that I'm able to pull off the appearance of being completely placid on the inside. And let's see. So then Denver goes on. When I try and debate like this, my body reacts on a visceral level, and I spend a great deal of energy just trying to keep myself from getting upset. So, how do you manage to overcome these visceral reactions and say what's on your mind in a jovial and polite manner? All right, so let's see. So as I said, first of all, I feel like I still have a lot of room for improvement. I can do better, right? And I'm going to try to do better. But the main thing that I do try to do during a debate is always to remember, who am I really talking to? I'm not really talking to my opponent. Your opponent, you're not going to change his mind. The people that I'm really talking to are the undecided people in the audience. I'm trying to talk to the undecided people in the audience. Sure, it's nice to go and give shout outs to people that already like you, but the constructive thing to do in a debate is to try to communicate effectively with people that don't already agree with you. People that are diehard opponents, that's pretty hopeless too. But there's some undecided group in the middle. Those are the people that I am always keeping in my mind. So I then try to put myself in their shoes and say, well, step one is just try to make it clear to them what it is that I'm saying. That's honestly my top priority debate, is just so that people know what my position is. So, if you only focus on being liked, people may like you, but you didn't actually advocate for your views because you didn't state them clearly, and you haven't changed anyone's mind about anything that way, other than, do I like this guy? Right? So there's that. And then, so of course it's also very helpful just to, even though you're not really trying to persuade your opponent, to always talk to him like he's your best friend, even really especially when he is not treating you very well. Right? So it's very hard for an undecided person to see two people talking. One of them is being friendly and the other one is being belligerent, and to not take the side of the friendly person. So that's, I think, a good idea. Right? And another thing that I do in debate, sometimes consciously, is if I'm defending a position that's extraordinarily unpopular, and honestly that's the main thing that I like to do in debates, is defend extraordinarily unpopular positions that are orphans in the world of ideas, where no one loves them sometimes, it seems, but me. Right? So when I'm doing that, I often will even explicitly say, my goal isn't even to persuade you this is right. My goal is to persuade you that it's not crazy. My goal is to persuade you that it's not crazy. That's actually what I will sometimes say. And even if I don't come right out and say it, that's often what I'm thinking about is, look, this is an idea that's just too far from what any normal person would ever really take seriously to win them over to the idea during this time. But I can, by presenting the arguments in a reasonable and fair-minded way, make them think, well, there's a person who doesn't seem like he's out of his mind, and he's saying a thing that I think you would have to be out of your mind in order to say. So which is it? Maybe the idea isn't so crazy. Maybe this person actually is, at least if still wrong, at least not out of their minds. All right. Then I've got a question from Tucker Omberg. Let's see. He says, I'm wondering why these techniques aren't more ubiquitous among employers and managers. Pleasant bosses who follow Carnegie's advice, especially the principles you discuss in Part 4 of the book club, could offer lower wages than more abrasive ones, giving them stronger incentives than most to adopt them. You pointed out throughout your post that following Carnegie's principles is hardly costly, but nearly everyone has had a boss who revels in shaming or humiliating their employees. Do bosses just value their ability to do this more than they would save on compensating differentials? Does following Carnegie's advice earn workers' affection at the expense of their productivity? Something else entirely? I'm interested to hear what you think. So first of all, this is a great question. Main thing I would say is that actually treating people well is much harder than it looks, because while intellectually the points are obvious, but there is a great difference between talking the talk and walking the walk, actually doing the things in practice. I mean, for most people, they can read a book and then they just forget about it. It just goes in one ear, out the next. And again, someone can intellectually know that it's a bad idea to go and up to a person and say, "You're wrong." And yet, how many people keep doing it? Yeah, so me, yeah, I keep doing it sometimes, but I've been improving over time, at least. And if you say you're still not that good, well, you've got to go back and see how bad I used to be to understand that. Let's see. So that's part of what's going on, is just that it's harder than it looks, right? And again, especially just to do it consistently, to apply it. So it does require, I say, well, doing it in any one instance is not hard, but adopting it as a consistent way of life, on the other hand, this really is, it does require a lot of attention, a lot of concentration, and just practice, practice that a lot of people don't want to do. But although it does remind me of when I was reviewing Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed, and she was talking about how poorly the bosses in working class jobs treat their employees. And this was a pretty stark contrast to typical treatment of bosses in white collar contexts, which I've also read about, and of course have a lot more firsthand experience and know a lot more people in white collar jobs. And again, I think one of the main things to realize is that usually you were promoting someone who originally did the job to be the manager of people that previously would have been coworkers, or maybe they're older and so they've got more experience, but you were managing people who were doing the job that you did some time ago, some years ago, right? And in that case, so if you just picture that the head janitor is going to be a former janitor, well, there's a guy who probably has not spent a lot of time going and figuring out how to really get along well with people, where someone who is the manager of a bank, he's probably spent quite a bit more time on it, right? And then, as Tucker was suggesting, I think there also is an element of nice styles of management do work better for white-collar employees than for blue-collar employees. This one I'm not totally sure on, but when so I've read a lot of ethnography about, contrast, especially about, life among the poor and working class, and it does seem like there is just a greater tendency towards irresponsibility and abuse of the system, and then managers responding. Although even there, I think that Carnegie is probably right, and that even if you are managing people who are not super self-motivated and ones that are inclined to shirk, still you would probably do better by reducing the criticism, increasing the praise, and just trying to make people feel good about themselves and about trying to trying to make a person who believes in them happy. So I'm not sure about that, but that does seem likely. But again, basically what I say is that if you are looking at someone who is, say, the head janitor, if he had really great interpersonal skills, he probably would be managing something more challenging and would just have a different background in the first place. So probably that. Okay. All right, so then we've got a question from Francis. So 2 questions, 1 serious, 1 funny. All right, so to some degree, you've avoided following Carnegie's rules by instead finding your beautiful bubble, but one also needs some social skills to craft such a bubble in the first place. For those who wish to focus on cultivating a bubble life, which of Carnegie's principles are most important to ingratiating yourself into a bubble, and which are more important for social skills outside the bubble? All right, so for ingratiating yourself inside of a bubble. Let's see. So what I would say is that all that advice that Carnegie gave about being a better leader strongly applies. So things like make the problem seem easy to correct, talk about your own faults first if you're going to criticize someone else, right? So that kind of thing is really good for winning people over that you see on a regular basis. And of course, beginning with praise, and as I suggested, also just ending with praise. So sandwiching any criticism inside of praise, and again, so that kind of thing. Let's see. Yes. So praising people, avoiding criticism, right? And of course, also just letting others talk. All right. So those, and then in terms of things that are important for social skills outside of the bubble, let's see. So again, so that is where you probably really want to get your tendency to criticize under control. So, I mean, people that you see every day, you may be able to build up a lot in the bank with them, and then when you criticize, they don't get so upset. But if you start criticizing people that you barely know, that's just not going to work at all. You're going to have that's basically cutting off your opportunities to make new friends and make a favorable impression, which could then lead to something good over the longer run. All right, then we've got the funny question. So, two perfect Carnegiean conversationalists meet. Does their conversation go anywhere? Do they circularly try to find and engage the other's interests? Likewise, must a perfect Bayesian and a perfect Carnegiean always agree? So I would say their conversation does go in a lot of places because, again, he's not saying never talk about yourself, and he's not saying that you shouldn't respond to what other people are saying, right? So I think, the most likely thing is that the two perfect Carnegiean conversationalists will quickly find a shared interest, and they will have a very nice conversation about that, right? And then let's see. And so, so what I would say is, you can be someone who's following Carnegiean principles and yet still have a wide variety of personality and interests within that. And really, what's likely to happen if you had two perfect Carnegieans speaking is that each would go and find out something about the other's personality and then, or interests, and then they would go from there. All right. Then we've got Sean. Let's see. This has been such an enjoyable series. I look forward to returning to it and to the book itself over time. Some quick questions. I know you studied and written about the Big Five personality traits. So for background, often known by the acronym OCEAN. So you've got openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, right? And if you've done the Myers-Briggs test, Myers-Briggs just relabels 4 of the 5. So Myers-Briggs drops neuroticism, so they don't talk about people's tendency to have negative emotions. And then they relabel high openness intuitive, and they relabel high agreeableness feeling, and they relabel and then they extroversion stays extroversion, and then finally, so openness, and then they relabel high conscientiousness judging. All right, so anyway, that is the usual mapping. All right, so anyway, so you've studied and written about the Big Five personality traits. I wonder how you process these principles in light of that literature. If, for example, you were homeschooling your kids on Carnegie and they had widely differing personalities measured along the Big Five, how would you differentiate your instruction? So here are the main things I would say. Agreeable people don't need Carnegie as much. So yeah, that's why I really need it. My instinct is to tell anyone that I think is wrong, they're wrong. At least that was my instinct. My instincts have changed over time, right? But still, that's when I was young. And anytime anyone said anything within hearing that was wrong, I would deliberately go and search them out and say, hey, you're wrong. Here's why. All right, shape up. All right, so not a very good approach, but that's what I did. So anyway, disagreeable people need Carnegie more because our instincts are just worse in a lot of ways. Again, worse for dealing with other people, not worse for figuring out the world, where I think that disagreeable people do have an edge in terms of this just the facts mentality, right? For extroversion, it's mixed, right? So extroverted people, on one hand, they are more cheerful normally. So this is all in the standard research literature on this. And they talk to other people. And of course, if you don't talk to other people at all, you can't win friends and influence people generally. At the same time, though, extroverts are more talkative. And, I know, right? So this is something I'm very talkative. I want to hog a conversation. I want to be the center of attention. And it takes a lot of work on my part to say, don't do that, Bryan. Don't try to hog the conversation. Listen to other people. Give other people a chance to talk. Right? So anyway, extroverted people are highly talkative, and Carnegie advises you not to become taciturn, but just to tone it down. Right? So tone it down, to give other people a chance to talk, to listen to what they have to say. And for me, a lot of what I've gotten over the years is just to look at other people's faces and see whether they seem to give a damn about what I'm saying. And if they don't, just drop it politely. Don't just say, oh, you're not interested in what I have to say. Well, fine, then what do you want to talk about? Don't do it that way. But instead, just to look at their faces, and if I see, for example, the person doesn't like economics, say, all right, well, that's what I do. So what do you do? Right? So it works out a lot better that way. And never want to make an issue out of someone isn't interested in what you're interested in. Just let it gracefully move along. Okay. All right. And then Probably the biggest thing that I'd say about interaction between personality and Carnegie is that people who are high in neuroticism and low in conscientiousness need Carnegie the most, but unfortunately they're not too likely to actually benefit from practice because they're probably not going to use it. So, in my mind, the people that gain the most from Carnegie are your high conscientiousness people, people who hear some principles, decide they make sense, and then they are ready to treat it like brushing their teeth for the rest of their life. Right? So something, this is the way that it's done. This is the skillful way of doing it. I'm going to learn the skill. I'm going to master it. I'm going to get good at it, apply it consistently. So for high conscientiousness people, this is where, in general, they get the greatest benefit from learning useful principles because they have the follow through to apply it. And then also, for people who are low in neuroticism, it's just a lot easier to do what Carnegie's saying because, if you're high in neuroticism, you just have a lot of negative feelings. You've got a lot of anger. You've got a lot of sadness. You've got a lot of anxiety. And it's hard when you have all these feelings to do what Carnegie's saying. Although still, I would say, if that's how you come out on personality tests, don't despair. Right? Just start trying to improve. Right? You don't have to be great. You just have to improve. Right? You get so much mileage out of improving a little bit. Why? Because other people are not trying at all. You try a little bit, and you put yourself ahead of other people, and this makes your life better and easier. Okay. All right, then Sean goes on. Let's see. If you had a kid who was high in agreeableness, high in extroversion, and low in neuroticism, would you nudge, in fact, away from Carnegie, or is there something about for that personality profile to apply? And what I would say is that there's always something to be gained, and in particular, it's always useful to remember to put yourself in the shoes of other people when you're talking to them. Always try to figure out what is their perspective on what's happening right now, and just to be mindful of that, right? So, to me, one thing that I am very mindful of is the possibility that what I'm saying is super boring to other people, right? And I try to think, would this be boring to this person? Maybe it would be really boring to this person. And then you can supplement that, of course, by just looking at people's faces and seeing whether they seem bored. And again, most people are not making an effort most people are not making an effort to seem less bored than they really are. So you can learn a lot by looking at people's faces. Again, seems pretty obvious, but again, the extent to which people don't do it, the extent to which people keep talking, even though the person's facial expression clearly tells them that they're doing something poorly, right? So, and again, I am no model here. I've done this many, many times in my life, and when I was a teenager, it was bottom of the barrel. All right. Then Sean goes on, related, an armchair Straussian read is that your readership is, on average, 1.2 standard deviations more disagreeable than the population, that some Carnegie 101 may in fact nudge them towards more pro-social behavior, so that some ideas that are outside the mainstream, that this community cherishes, open borders, etc., get a fair hearing. Yeah, absolutely. And then continues, you've written before about how libertarians need to be nicer. Is there some way to nod to that? Yeah, it's more than a nod. Right? So whenever I have libertarians talking about what can we do to be more persuasive, how can we fix our arguments, I just want to say, that's your problem, that you think the problem is the arguments. The arguments are very good. The arguments are way above the bar for what would normally persuade a person, if a person could be persuaded. The problem is delivery, not being friendly. Be friendly to people. Be very, very friendly to people. Right? And again, this is something where you can keep the message exactly the same, but just smile at other people. Talk nicely to other people, show interest in them as human beings, talk about their kids, right? And to me, this is in no way a tax, right? So, even someone that I consider their political views terrible, if I find out, they got a kid who does soccer, right? Well, how's your kid's soccer game going? It's not so bad to ask about that, right? And I think it does. Even people that you might think of as just awful people. Right? So get them on that, and you can see a different side of them, and it does make it easier for you to just communicate with them, even if you're not going to persuade them, because, of course, a lot of people, it's not going to work. All right. And then last question from Steve Marino. Do you think Carnegie's methods are equally effective for men and women? Oh, all right. I'm especially thinking in terms of competence/likability trade-off bias. And asking around about Carnegie's book, I've had more than one woman tell me that when they apply techniques like these in dealing with men, the default reaction in many cases is that these gestures are taken as signals that the woman is interested in having sex with the man. All right, so first of all, that's a really tough question. right? And I'm just going to be honest. A large majority of my social interaction is with other men. All right, so I talk a lot to my wife, talk a lot to my daughter, so that's where my sample is is richest. And then, like the rest of my sample, it's it's just not that much data. Just gotta be honest about that. But still, here's my reaction. So, what would I tell my daughter when she is older? Is it context free? Then maybe. All right. So if you don't give any context and you just start, if you were a woman and you just start giving a lot of praise to men, right? Like like in just situations where they wouldn't otherwise expect it, then yeah, maybe they will. It's fairly likely that they will say, "Oh, this girl really likes me, wants to have a romantic relationship with me." Right. However, right, it's very different if there's a professional context where you're saying, like, "I really like what you did on this project." Right, or if you're talking to someone about their book and say, "I really like what you did in this article," and especially if it's specific praise, if it's not just, "Oh, you're so great," right? That again is more likely to be taken as an advance. All right. So basically, if you show too much praise and too much curiosity about a person, then it could be taken the wrong way. Well, and actually, honestly, I would say that if you are a man and you offer too much praise and show too much curiosity in a woman, probably it's going to be misinterpreted in the same way. So it's not totally a thing that Carnegie works for men but not for women. I think it's more that there are complexities when you have intergender relations with where you're applying Carnegie's principles. If you do it in a very casual way, or if you don't think about the possibility that it will be misinterpreted, then you could mess it up. But I would just dial it down a bit, and then it's not likely to be misinterpreted, especially if there's some reason why the praise or the curiosity would be happening. All right, let's see. And I also say those leadership principles are quite gender-free, and maybe even more important for women to get ahead in life than men. So again, those leadership principles, things like begin with praise. Like I said, I advise also ending with praise. Make the problem seem easy to correct. So it's just not a good idea to tell people we got a problem and there's no way of fixing it. Right? Well, then what are we supposed to do with that? Right? So you've got that. And again, being willing to talk about your own shortcomings as well. Right? And by the way, so I've been thinking about this a little bit more. So, the advice of talking about your own shortcomings, I think it works very well one-on-one. Or if you're just talking to one person, you're criticizing them, there's no audience, talk to them one-on-one, then I think it really is helpful to go and admit your own shortcomings, and it makes the person feel like it's okay to listen to you. First of all, you know where they're coming from. It's not like you've had no problems in your life, so you couldn't understand their situation. And it also just makes people feel better. You're saying, look, I'm not better than you. Like, I'm just trying to help you. Right? So there's that. All right. Yeah. All right. So anyway, so those I think actually may be even better for women in terms of usefulness in real life, right? So and you could either talk about how it's terrible that life's not fair and that people interpret the same words from women differently than from men, or you can just try to say, I'm going to go and try to make this work best for me. So likely that a lot of people really resent being criticized by women, especially. Right? And by applying these Carnegie principles, you can make the criticism work better, be more effective. You can change people's minds without leading to resentment and lack of cooperation in the future. So yeah, so I would say that these things, if anything, probably, that part, at least the leadership principles from part 4, are probably actually better for women, more useful for them, especially in a job context. Let's see. Okay. So those are all the questions that we've got. And let's see, anything else left to say about Dale Carnegie? So again, this is almost the first self-help book ever written. It's the book, I can't believe it that it was really the first, but it really did spawn an entire genre. I think that economists tend to not really appreciate self-help books because they think people are optimizing already, right? Unless, of course, you take psychology and economics really seriously. And I say, yes, you really should take psychology and economics really seriously. To say I'm going to study society, but I'm not interested in what people think or feel is crazy, right? And in addition to just being a very poor way of understanding the world, you are missing out on so many facts, so many useful things that you can do and apply, right? So, if you are interested in social science, while on the level of evidence, obviously, Carnegie and self-help books in general are not going to impress you because they're not doing experiments, they're not doing econometrics, they're just speaking anecdotally. And yet, if you have a broader understanding of what really counts as evidence and how we can verify things, still, I would say that Carnegie is at minimum a very fruitful source of hypotheses, and seems to me that so much of what he says is so obvious that it's really more something that you just put into a textbook rather than even check. Just like you're not really going to check whether demand curves slope downward, supply curves slope upwards. It's in the textbook. If a student were to say, "Where's the paper proving that?" almost no intro teacher could tell them. So look, it's just so obvious. It really is beside the point to go and find a particular paper supporting it. It's just true. It's clear. And I would say for so many of the things that Carnegie says, that's also correct. By the way, so I've said actually quite a few times in the discussions, but it's worth repeating, that there are a lot of strategies that Carnegie tells you never to do and says they're always a disaster, where if you pay attention, you'll notice that they work sometimes. So just like intimidating other people, just being really mean to people to get them to fear you and then obey you, this works sometimes. Carnegie would make you think this never works. What I would say rather is that it is not on average a good idea to do it. On average, it doesn't work very well. And also it's very risky on top of that. So you've got a low mean and a high variance, right? So of course we can all y'all think of cases of people who have done well by being very aggressive and intimidating. But always remember all the people that try to do that people just hate and are losers, and keep that in mind. It's not a strategy that works that well overall. Okay, so I think I will wrap it up here. Thanks to everyone who participated in the book club. Hope you enjoyed the book, and if you're just seeing this now, it is never too late to read Dale Carnegie's classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So thanks a lot. Signing off.